Joanna is going to tell us about her super cool template, which pre-processes and creates a whole bunch of really useful information that a lot of us are probably having to do on our own anyway. And this is going to streamline a lot of work, I think. So take it away, Joanna.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, and I want to also introduce Andrea Joe. She's new to my team, one of our logic liaisons, and she's jumped in and has begun helping with these templates as well. And there are also others on the call. Richard Moffat co-leads the logic liaison group with me, and there are other logic liaisons on the call too. So we're just a core group of people who help support coding for the domain teams and have come together to share best practices and create some templates. And our goal this year is to create kind of a cohesive set of templates that covers the basic space of things, that the work that tends to get repeated over and over again. I think I have the wrong screen. Let me share again. Yeah. So I'm not getting the little green line around my screen. Do you guys see the logic liaison templates?
We see your PowerPoint, yes.
Okay. So this first one, that's a kind of a fresh version of some work we done last year. We're going to go over today. This is for the confirmed patients, meaning those that have a PCR or EUG test with a positive result. And then we're working in the next week to produce a sister template for patients that have a COVID diagnosis but no positive test. And then we'll work on the other patients as well. This first template makes use of two important dates. The first time they had the lab test, and then if available, the first time they had a diagnosis code for COVID. And so these will have slight variations of some of that logic, and we'll name the column names appropriately so that if you're joining those tables, you know where the logic behind the column that you're using for your particular work. But so these are coming. We're going to have a similar template to what you see today for these other patient populations. We're also working on some site and data characterization templates that will help you evaluate your resulting data frames and look for patterns of missingness and do other quality checks that will help you decide, do you need to drop certain sites? Are there certain variables where you have to manage some out of range values, that type of thing when you're prior to your analysis. So that's just a preview of our work that's coming for those who've not heard it. And I'm going to just go into this now. So I'll start from the top. If you are coming from the home page, you can go to the Knowledge Store. And you can browse by a keyword. Because this one is PCR and EUG, we could use that, or we could look for logic liaison. So here's the logic liaison PCR or EUG COVID positive patient summary fact table. And I'm going to do most of my training today off of the README and then off of the code. The code for today has been imported into the training space with the synthetic data, and so I won't be able to demonstrate actually importing the template, but we'll talk about that. So I'm gonna walk through the README. I know that it's hard to want to look at READMEs, but hopefully pointing out what's here will make you aware so you can come back and reference it. A lot of questions I get in Slack are in here, and we do update this, and especially with Andrea here, we're going to keep this more and more fresh over time. We're trying to bundle and limit our releases so that this is not changing underneath you all the time, but it is important that we maintain it and we add to it. So the previous version already had the long COVID variables added, and this one also has some social determinants variables that have been added for the level 3 templates. We've fixed a couple variable names just that were not consistent with the other ones. We want the end of these strings to look exactly the same so we can do more for loop operations on the variables that we created. So if you've used the old version of the template or the template output, just be aware that there's a small number of columns where you might see the word before instead of the word pre, that kind of thing. So there's a data dictionary in this README, and of course you can just open the table as well to see the column names. There were a couple bugs underlying 3 of these. Some of them were in the concept set creation itself, where maybe something hadn't fully saved or something like that, but we now have fixed those 3 variables. And then we did, for the time being, remove the pattern of missingness from this template. It's computationally intensive. If you're new to this template, don't worry about it. It's going to be part of our new data quality template that we're making. It'll be one of many features that are available there. So we can give you that code if it's something that you're looking for and don't have in the meantime. So the main purpose of this template, I want today for you guys to know what are these main artifacts that are available. So if you just want to use the artifacts of this, what's out there for you, and then we're going to go and try to understand the code workbook and how it's structured and talk through how it would be modified for your particular project if you want to customize anything in it. So there's 3 main uses here. In general, we're trying to get some facts about the PCR and AG positive. We're going to have facts about every visit for these patients, and then we have a summary table with flags and indicators about the various facts that we're pulling together. You can use it by analyzing the output data set in Contour. So here's our knowledge store object again. These are the output data sets. You'll see that there's one for the level 3 and there's one for the level 2 projects. So according to your permissions, you can open that particular table. I can't open them now, but once that table is open, you can go and analyze them directly out of there in Contour. If you want to do like a preliminary look at how many patients we have with a certain thing, or put some logic together to assess feasibility for your project, you can do that directly in Contour. You can also import the template outputs, like the machine learning group just takes the output for one of the projects that they're working on right now, and they ingest that into their pipeline. This describes exactly how you would do that, a couple approaches to that. And just so you know, these data sets are automatically updated with every refresh of the underlying OMOP data. So if you come back to the knowledge store object here, these data sets, if you open them, you'll see a history, and it's refreshed with every run. Also, when we update the template itself, we do a refresh at that time. So you'll see a history of the versions of those data sets if you open them up. Make sure if you're pinning your data at a certain time input date or something, then you would match and go get the right version of this table if you're just ingesting it into your workbook and marrying it with other work that you've done. And then lastly, you can also import the entire multi-node template. And this README has instructions for doing that. You would grab one of these 2 workbooks and you would add them to your workspace. And I'm going to go over that in a minute, a little bit further down. We have just recently added some social determinants of health variables. This analysis, there's about a dozen of them that were identified by the SDOH domain team as being ones they recommend for general use and kind of the cream of the crop. They all actually come from this one data set, which was work from Boston University. Many of the variables are ones that they did not generate, but that they're pulling together. And then there's a few variables that were custom created by this group at BU. And if you go into that data set, there's links to their documentation around it. So make sure to go and read all of their documentation around those variables if that's something you're going to use. But for the purposes of this document, we just have them listed in our data dictionary with links to that data set. So here's the main data dictionary. We put the concept sets in italics, the concept set names. So at any time, if you wanted to go and point to a different concept set for creation of any of these variables, then you would find the string, the reference string here, and go and replace it in the code with the concept set that you would like to use instead. So we try to name those throughout. I should mention that in general, the concept sets that we're using here are still in debate, I think, by the community with regards to what is the best way. Do we have a systematic way for creating these kind of general clinical concepts? The ones that we have populated here, we pretty much cover the Charlson Comorbidity Index, the named clinical concepts, but we build them using SNOMED CT. At this moment, that's how these concept sets are created. And we had a number of clinicians validating that method. So that really leverages the OMOP hierarchy and uses the standard data that we're working with here, the harmonized data, and we're looking for concept IDs that are in the standardized data columns of all the tables. There are lots of other approaches that have different strengths in terms of creating those kind of variables, especially when it comes to Charleston. So please do be aware that you can swap them out. And there's a lot of discussion ongoing. The data liaisons are working on curating a set of concept sets that are from VSAC that are externally validated. And my understanding at this time from the N3C PIs is that I will swap over to those here when a full set's available. So that's still in process, and that will of course be noted in our release notes, and I'll announce it as well so that hopefully people are aware who are using this template that there's been a change that's coming. So again, there's a note right here about this, that at this time we're using the SNOMED CT hierarchy. That doesn't mean there's always just a single SNOMED code with descendants. There are sometimes multiple SNOMED codes with descendants, but concept set creation is something I work on in collaboration with teams for specific research projects. I would not say it is by any means something I'm an expert in. So I'm just kind of doing the best I can at the moment with the what I have at hand to build these for you, but it will be evolving over time. So again, here's the data dictionary. Before I go over any more of these variables, are there questions from anyone, or Andrea, Richard, anyone want to add anything?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so we have both the lab positive, so everyone in this particular cohort will have a lab positive date because that's the definition of inclusion. And then we also have their first diagnosis date when available for everyone in this cohort. Those are created in the very first cohort node we'll see, and then used throughout as two index dates. This is the main index date for this group, is their PCR AG positive test, the first time they had one. These other things are being pulled in from the persons table, and we calculate their age at COVID. We combine race ethnicity. This was used by several domain teams, this type of value, and was something that we saw the NIH using over the last couple of years, and the CDC. So we've combined race and ethnicity into a single variable and simplified it here. You can, of course, again, go into the code and customize this part of it if you would like to handle it differently. You can just remove the code that consolidates them and use the raw data, or apply whatever logic you'd like to apply. I'll just go ahead right now while I'm thinking of it and show you where that is. It's in the main cohort node where we build these kind of facts about the patient. And here we have this race ethnicity. So it's pretty obvious when you skim through to find that in here, and you could, you could leave them separate and leave a race and ethnicity column separate if you'd like to do it that way. They're not used anywhere else in the notebook. They're just pulled in at the very end, and however you've created them, it will pull them in to match at the very end. So making an edit to that only requires one change right here. Let's see here if there's anything I also get asked about. We have several things coming in from the manifest table. So if you wanted to filter out sites that maybe hadn't done a data extraction for a long time, or within a range where you're interested in the data, then you could filter out those sites. If there are certain data models that you have to handle differently, like if you're really needing to have certain information that at this time is not sent by, say, the ACT data model or something, then you could filter out one of the data models by referring to this column here. Similar with date shift. So this tells you, again, these will be at the patient visit I'm sorry, the person level table at the end. For every person you'll have this, you can decide whether or not date shift is going to impact your analysis. There are a few sites that even in the level 3 data, there's some date shifting. So it gives you the maximum date shift for that site here, if they do that. So here we start getting these, all of the BU share care data pulled in, and you can reference their documentation around it. It's really great to have those showing up. This data set should be available to all projects now. And so if you have any permissions issues, let me know or put in a ticket, and Palantir should address it for you. But so far it appears to be working for everyone now. That's because this is a class 4 public data set. They've decided it is aggregated enough that joining it is not going to increase any risk of re-identification of these patients.
Joanna, these SDOH variables are at, I'm sorry, at the county level, is that the way to go?
Yeah. So actually I have a little section about that down. I think, oh, maybe it's up above. Did we already pass it? Yeah. So we use the preferred county. That was by recommendation from Jimmy Fong and the SDOH group. So he has a data set, this one, that's this crosswalk file that we use. The preferred county references the county in which the majority of the people in that zip code live. So if your zip code crosses 2 counties, they're going to count people in the 2 counties and pick the one with the greater population. That's also something you could customize in the code because we're directly doing that selection in here, and you could pick a different column if you didn't want preferred county. There are other columns in this crosswalk file. Yeah. County is not as richly populated as zip, so that's why we use the crosswalk.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question, just double checking. So all the patient data in N3C are with confirmed COVID diagnosis. There's no control group.
There is a control group. So this particular template, we're filtering it for the people that have the positive PCR or AG lab test result. But if you look at the main dashboard, it will give you some summary counts, and the overall COVID positive includes some other people, including those that just had a positive COVID diagnosis. It also includes people with a positive antibody test who may or may not have had an active infection, but you could look at date ranges to find that if you have access to level 3 data. And it also includes people with some conditions that were suspicious for COVID in early 2020. So there's a complex definition of that cohort. And I don't know, Sean, if you have that GitHub handy, that documentation. But
Got
I
you.
was
yeah,
looking
there's
into it.
documentation on the cohort. Yeah. And then we also have all of the control patients. So here now we have almost 4 million that qualify for that positive definition. That was very broad. And then a number of controls, 2-to-1 matching in general. So 2 control patients being someone that we do not have evidence of them being part of this group. 2 more patients are selected every participating site and brought in, and they're done exact matching on age, race, ethnicity, and gender for that. And so if you're using those as independent variables in an analysis that's comparing your COVID positive to the controls, you're going to have a problem because those are exact matched on as you bring them in. So there's caveats around using these control patients that you kind of want to learn more about and really read that overall N3C cohort definition to understand these non-positive people if you're going to use them. That's kind of a short answer right now, but point you in the right direction. That's why we focused on the sweet spot of the COVID lab
that was
positive here.
Yes, that was a good tutorial. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So in this version of the data, we have the max BMI before our COVID index date, our positive lab test, and we also have one you'll see further down. Oh, here's the post. So that's available at both those times, and we look for reasonableness in recorded BMI. We default to that if it's available that day. If there's no recorded BMI that day, we look for reasonable heights and weights, calculate BMI, again, look for reasonableness in that range, and then select that for the day. And this is something that's available in the template if you want to customize it. I'm going to just come over here. We haven't gone through the code yet, but just again, while I'm thinking of it, where's my measurements? It all gets reordered every time I import it. Oh, so I'm not looking at the template view of things, unfortunately, because I'm in the training workspace, so you don't get to see the template interface, but the template interface provides the default bookends for this, and these are the same ones that Steve Johnson used in his work when he did some BMI template work last year. So that's where these default ranges come from for reasonableness, and you can change those. So if you're doing like pediatric research or research where you think that there's a more appropriate bookend, these are really broad. I mean, 100 is very high. So if you wanted to tighten that up, the majority of our data falls in a tighter range than that, but it's a pretty small tail that goes out this far. You're welcome to tighten up that criteria. So that's our calculated BMI. You can always, go backwards in this template away from our final node, our summary table, which is the one that's saved in the knowledge storage. You can always go backwards and find as much detail as you want. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. But the final table is what is represented in this data dictionary, and the final table just has the max before and the max after. We had to kind of pick the most commonly used variables to put in that right now, so we keep it to around 100 columns wide, and it doesn't get too out of control, but you can of course customize that and make your own variables. Okay, so we have just like one or two examples of, or a handful of drugs. The only one we have before is the systemic corticosteroids. Most of all, we wanted to put some drug in here so it was easy to swap out or add additional drugs by copying and pasting code in the template if you want to do that. But certainly there are a lot more important drugs to work on here, as well as important measurements and other things. We just had to pick a few things to use as examples. And the data liaisons helped with the concept sets for these drugs, and also with the IMV and ECMO concept sets. So that's where those came from. And IMV is ventilation, and ECMO is the extracorporeal membrane oxygen, I think, something like that. So these are oxygen support indicators for those patients who had a COVID hospitalization. We're going to look at the definition of COVID hospitalization in a second. So we have a death during hospitalization indicator. The death records are more reliable when you're in the hospital, so you might consider that for an outcome variable if you're doing any study on inpatients rather than using overall death. So yeah, we had the pre-variables up top, then we have the ones happening during hospitalization, and then we have the things that happen in general post-diagnosis. But of course, some of these can happen during hospitalization as well. We just have grouped them in this way. So we have the COVID diagnosis that's coming in the record after they've had their lab positive test, and then we have the long COVID clinic visit and the long COVID condition as well in here. And then we have systemic corticosteroids post-COVID, the same drug group as before. And then we have a special concept set that was created just to identify corticosteroids that were being given for COVID based on the CDC guidelines around that. And Harold Lehman's helped with that concept set creation and curation. We also have remdesivir. Again, there are lots of other interesting drugs, so feel free to either swap these out or copy and paste the code to create additional variables. We've pulled out some of the first occurrence dates if you're interested in the first occurrence of any of the other columns, this gives you some nice sample code so that you can quickly find a first occurrence of anything else. We also have the COVID hospitalization length of stay in here. So here we have the definitions around the hospitalization and ED visits. They're a bit far down, but this is the order that our template spits the variables out in. So we made the README appear in this order. Thanks, Andrea, for your help. So this ED visit, this is based on a definition that, again, Harold Lehman shared that was being used by the CDC for some work in BCORNet and I believe some other projects as well. And so this is how they defined the association between a COVID diagnosis and lab test and an ED visit. And then similarly, a hospitalization. So we'll first look at the ED visit. So if they've had an emergency room visit and a COVID diagnosis that are charted in the day prior to or 16 days following a lab positive PCR or AG test, their first lab positive PCR AG test, then this would be a qualifying emergency room visit. Note that if it overlaps with an admission or it's consecutive with an admission, then it would be included here. That emergency room visit is considered part of the hospitalization and it's only counted once. So if it's adjacent with a hospitalization, that emergency room visit will be part of this. If it's a standalone emergency visit, then it would be here. And so I think they're looking for, the first evidence of this active infection with a positive PCR AG test, and then also seeing that by having a diagnosis code entering the chart around the same time, I presume there's some rationale that it was thought to be significant. We know that so many patients coming into the hospital are not coming in for their COVID. They might be tested routinely when they come in, but they could have been there for a car accident, another surgery, a stroke, heart attack, anything else. So just by, temporally associating a COVID positive test or diagnosis with hospitalization or any other event you see, we have to remember that doesn't mean they're causally associated, right? So we can't assume that because they had IMV or ECMO during their hospitalization, that it was for COVID treatment or because of COVID that they had to have that oxygen support. We see that a lot, like in the neuro domain, when we're working with these critically ill patients, a lot of our stroke patients go on to vents and it has nothing to do with their COVID positive lab test. So just be careful. You're going to have to apply, more critical thinking based on your own research specific question to try to tease out, within, for example, hospitalization, which things are happening maybe related to COVID and which are related to some other major a diagnosis or event that you're looking at. You can't always completely tease it out, but you can do some things to try to look at, really specific timing of events or other things that are happening, other diagnostic things, other severity of the other event that you might be able to tease out kind of what's related to what. I will also just point out here while we're talking about this that the macro visit table is used for this. So we are leveraging that table that's available to everybody in the general data sets that you can access. And that rolls together, again, all of these things like emergency visits that touch another hospital admission, and all of those adjacent admission days or overlapping admission days get rolled together. And the macro visit table has documentation about that for you. Any questions so far on that?
Could I ask one question just about this concept of emergency visits that are adjacent to a hospitalization? So if you have an emergency visit that's recorded for Monday and a hospitalization that begins on Tuesday, those would be considered one thing, right? Or contrasting, you could have an emergency visit on Monday that results in an admission to the hospital on the same day, on that Monday. Right. So do those essentially end up looking like the same thing?
Yeah, well, in general, you're going to see dates on the same day because they don't leave and come in the next day, and so there's an overlap in days. So the code for macro visit table used to require that overlap so that there would have been an ED and a new admission or any admission, the same day. But there are some sites where the admission days appear to start and end on the same day and not extend into the next day. And so because of that, there's some recent custom code that Andrew Gervin made that collapses some of those into a single visit when we see there's that kind of pattern of a hospitalization starting, ending, and then again next day start and end, and again next day start and end. But the macro visit table should have that documentation for you. It's not in my
Okay, thank
template.
you.
Yeah. All right, I kind of want to get into the code, but there are more comorbidity indicators, again, because we cover all of the CDC risk factors and the Charlson concepts. Well, we almost cover it all. I think we're still improving on that a little bit, but you can look at the lists of the CDC risk factors where people get severely ill. And of course, like once you actually either open the data set from here, or because I can't open that, I'm going to open it from here. So this is where I've made an example using the synthetic data. So this is what the final data set looks like that we've been talking about. You can look at the columns here, and we can see all of those ones that we were just talking about, and you'll notice that there are many here in the capital letters that are all of those conditions. So we didn't list them out one by one, but in general, at this time, because of me being the one who's controlling the concept sets that underlie this, the name of the concept set that was used actually matches the variable name, and so that's described in here. Right, so if you're looking for like what concept set is underlying this heart failure before COVID, then you would go into the concept set browser and you would put in heart failure, exactly the same string here, but with spaces between the words. And you'd be able to look at that concept set in detail and see if you wanted to customize it or swap it out with another one. If you want to swap it out, you're just going to change the place where you see this string. So let's take a little look at that in a moment here. We're going to go in. Yeah, let me just finish the README real quick. We have a couple things about the template limitations, and one of those is this underlying concept sets, which I've been talking about. Then we have a lot of limitations in the data in general, just reusing this massive data set of harmonized data. And so some of the tips that the logic liaisons have pulled together are just listed right here for you to skim over. If you're new to working with the data, it might be a good idea to look these through. And then there's also a what is it called, the FAQ place, Sean, that people share? The community notes. There's community notes as well. Yeah. You can ask Sean about those if you want to find more tips from the community about working with the data. So now we have, how do you modify this template for a specific project? If you've never worked with templates before, this should walk you through exactly so you know how to click. Once you find this knowledge store object and you open the README, you can, keep reading down till you get to here, and this will tell you exactly how to import this template into your workspace. So again, I can't do it since I'm not actually using a level 2 or a level 3, but take a look through here and it's going to tell you how to do it. Here we have it opened up. I guess I'll do it like this first. So this is the simple structure of the template. A lot of our previous templates look like this as well. To the left, we have all of the input data sets, our OMOP data sets, and the Boston University data set, the concept sets. All those are to the left. These will automatically be imported into your workbook when you click import and you accept the importation of those tables, just as described in the README. There is one location, there's a postal code data set that you may not have access to, so it's not pinned, it won't automatically import, but you'll notice in the code here that if it's something you have, you can take out uncomment this part of the code and leverage that. That's just going to bring in longitude and latitude. So for those people who like to use Contour to make maps of their data, these are columns you need, and this is how you would bring that in. You just need access to that postal code data set first. For the purposes of this example, that's commented out. And then the level 2 data, of course, does not have the social determinants of health data, but the level 3 data does, and the level 3 template does. So if you're in level 3, these variables will be brought in here. The way we were just talking about with joining on zip, we are using the ones that have 5-digit zip, and that's why we're only have it available in the level 3 data. And not everyone in level 3 has a 5-digit zip, so we're filtering to those folks that have at least 5 digits available and using those first 5 digits. Okay, so the other basic demographics and then the things being brought in from the manifest table we've already talked about here. Now we're going to just use that list of people to go and filter all of the main OMOP tables. So if any of the concept sets were things that you wanted to change, this middle column is where you would work with that. This middle column is where we take those main input tables and we filter them to rows that interest us. So let's take a look at conditions. Oh, observations happens to be at the top. It reordered it for me. That's fine. We'll work with observations. So first, we're going to just join it with the people that we have found. So our cohort is the PCR AG positive for this template. And then we're going to identify the lists of codes associated with each of those concept set names that we're using to build our variable. So this is where you would swap those out if you wanted to use a different IMV concept set. Come here and change it. IMV is a concept that's actually used across domains, so you would need to change it in multiple places. And the way our template is built, you can use the same name for that variable across all of these. And when it combines, the next data frame is going to combine them and create a flag if it has found it anywhere, a flag by the same name. So here we're making lists of these concept IDs. Then we're going to go into the harmonized data. So we're looking at the main concept ID for the map data. So not the source data. We're looking at the harmonized data in this template. Change it in every node if you want to change it to source, but we're looking at the harmonized data. And then we're going to find, here's all these with columns where we're adding columns for flags for all of these different concepts that we've had listed out here. And then we just find the maximum flag for each person on each visit date. So you end up with a table. We could open this data set. And again, this is the synthetic data. So you end up with a person, a visit date, and then whether or not they had each of these things charted on that day, at least one time. A 0s and 1 flags. So we do the same thing across all these, and the code for each of these nodes is structured in exactly the same way. We're going to be simplifying this even more over time now that we have the variables named all the same way. We're going to put these in for loops and make it much easier for you to just change your concept in one place and have it propagate throughout, but that's a work in progress and not something we have ready for you yet. So at this time, you'd have to go in and change it in every domain where your concept appears, and then also change it in downstream nodes. Change or add, right? If you want to add something new, you're going to just add it to every block of code through here. So we have the place we create concept IDs, list of concept IDs, add your brand new concept there, make a list of those IDs, add in one of these with columns for your new column name, and then add an fmax statement. So there's just 3 blocks of code for each of these. Again, these are going to be consolidated in the next version. Once we have all of those, or I guess I should point out the visits. Yeah, so the visits, this is where we're applying the CDC definition for hospitalization and ED visits that are related to their first COVID diagnosis, first COVID positive test and diagnosis that's available around that time. this is the logic. So if you want to have a different time frame for hospitalization, this is where you would come in and change these -16 and 1 bookends to something broader. So yeah, we're filtering all of those fact tables, and then we combine them here. And this is all facts, and this is where it's going to be one row per patient's visit. And by visit, actually, it's any day where there's a fact captured. So it's not, I use that term a little bit loosely here. You know, it may be a day they just had only thing recorded was a COVID positive test or something, but it's a day where we have a fact about the patient. It's probably not the most accurate term to use. So here in the synthetic data, we have some fake people IDs, and you can see their the first 2 columns are always the same for each patient with their index events, their PCR and COVID diagnosis. You have all of the things that we've combined from the other data frames, and then we are now also adding these time relationship flags here for this this visit day for this patient was before their COVID index event, which in this case is their PCR AG lab positive test. And this is after. And does it occur during the hospitalization? Does it occur later? We're only creating during hospitalization variables for you, you know, off of a few of these, but you can make it for any of them that you're interested in, or if you're adding a new drug or something and you're really interested about looking at during hospitalization, make sure that in the final node you come to this during hospitalization section and make sure you add Fmax statements here for anything that you're interested in looking at during the hospitalization. We just have a couple examples in here for you. So yeah, in the very last node, what we're doing is we're just splitting it into basically these 3 data frames from the prior input and looking at everything that happened before COVID, so we can find yes or no, did something ever happen before COVID? Did it ever happen during hospitalization? Did it ever happen after COVID? And that's what these sections do here. Again, add anything that you're interested in adding there. Everybody needs something different, so we just have to kind of provide something foundational for people to work off of. And then we just join those tables, and we add in a couple calculated fields at the end, like the length of stay and stuff. Right now, along the way, there's a couple places we're replacing null values with 0, and Andrea and I need to fix BMI so it doesn't get zeros where instead of nulls. We don't want you having 0 value BMIs and averages or other things that you're computing. Just realized that was an issue for one of our users who hadn't noticed all those 0 values. So we'll fix that throughout in our next version, but just a warning to those of you who are using the data. You can replace it with null in your final data frame. So I think that's the main things I wanted to cover, is just kind of the structure of the code and how you would customize it. We've got some time for questions now.
Super awesome. I know, oh, Jen, you had one.
Oh, well, I think this is really good. I have a few silly questions, if you don't mind. If no other person gonna throw out question. Just curious about medication. Is it the same way, looking up the diagnosis, that you go to the synthetic data set and look up the short list of possible medication that can replace in? Is that how that works?
Yeah, so I'm using synthetic data because this is a training, but once you have a project approved, you can get approval to see either the de-identified real data or the limited data set that includes real zip codes and dates, unless there's date shifting at that site. But yeah, real zip and dates is in level 3. So this is just for training that you're looking at synthetic data. These input tables would change to the real data inputs if you're in your own project But yeah, the inputs include things like measurements, device. That's the concept set members where we have all those groupers for the names of different lists of concepts that all mean one thing. Condition, era, drug exposure. This is
Gotcha. That's
this is the
probably
drug
in, yeah,
exposure.
drugs.
Yeah.
So would
And then this
vaccine,
is
yeah,
sorry, real quick. And then
yeah.
this is where that is filtered. And so you would come in and modify this with a concept set for a drug that you're interested in, and then make sure it also appears in these downstream nodes here. But yeah, go ahead.
So vaccine will be considered as drug exposure, or
Yeah, there's a new vaccine table is it available now, Richard? I know that Andrew Gervin of Palantir
I
is
don't think
working
it's
on that.
quite ready.
Okay. So
Gotcha.
that will be part of, we'll probably leverage that in our next version of this rather than recreating that ourselves, just to kind of sync up with the work that he's done.
Yeah. So on your note, yeah.
Or you can actually maybe just not to add columns to this template, you could just marry it with his data set that he's producing for vaccines.
Right. So on your note on the README, it mentioned some of the medication administration route is not clear. About dosage.
That is true. That is true. Dosage is also not always clear. And we don't handle that in here except for the fact that some of these concept sets, they do eliminate when known certain dosages of drugs, like say for the COVID treatment, the corticosteroids that are used for COVID treatment. There are some that are eliminated based on dose when known in the concept name. But you have to look at additional columns in this drug table if you want to look at the route of exposure and the dosage. And so, yeah, this is actually just a very preliminary look at medications. If that's something that's like a main endpoint for your analysis or a really important variable, it's something you have to dig into. And you can always explore those input tables, over here, you can look at a preview of them, or you can go and open it up and explore in here, or you can use Contour to chart it and take a look at that data. But yeah, you can see, I'm not sure what the synthetic data looks like here, but you do have route concept IDs, and you can filter on certain drug routes if you want to, but you'll just notice that it might be null for many rows of data, so it's not always available or known.
Got you. Yeah, this is very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the actual concept names you'll see, like here, this has a dosage in it, but it doesn't always have it in there. You might also just have the name of the drug without a dosage in it. Yeah, so you can deal with dosage, at this level as well.
Yeah. When they are represented is combined in their concept name, kind of like a condition as well. Different stage of I don't know, renal failure, for example.
Yeah. Does anyone else on the call have tips about drugs that I'm not mentioning?
Just don't get down to the ingredient level unless you know you want to do that.
Yeah, there's always a kind of a judgment call to make, like what's really most important. Are you willing to eliminate lots of rows of data out of your data set because the specificity is really important for a drug or any other kind of data in here? Even all these concepts, you might have things that are coded at a very high level or a very detailed level, and you don't really know, based on the workflow that you're going to get the detailed level. You might just get heart failure, you might get the exact kind of heart failure the person had. And so you have to make decisions like, well, I'm only going to study those people that I have a very, very narrow definition around the event, the condition, the drug, whatever it is. And it's critical that I know that, or I'm going to accept a lot of unknowns and have, just it's a sensitivity specificity kind of judgment call that you have to make with all your variables. But yeah, just because a data set's made for you doesn't mean that just because you have a variable that's a flag, I've got a corticosteroid or not, doesn't mean you shouldn't open the data set then and actually look in detail at what that means for the patients involved, especially once you filter it down, because maybe within these you're also just interested in some rare condition that you want to join in. And so once you look at that, you only have a couple thousand patients or a couple hundred patients of data, and then your judgment's going to be different than if you're making the judgment on the whole data set. So we are making templates again to try to help you with that stage of things, but those will be coming out this quarter.
Awesome.
And thank you, Saad. I am constantly tapping him, especially when editing the multi-note template, and he's helping me think about bringing this thing to an even more kind of a more elegant version that's going to make making add-ons and changes even faster. So excited. Thanks, Saad.
Not a problem at all.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Joanna.
Yeah.
Awesome work. I love to see this kind of shared resources that we can do.
Yeah, simple is good. It's hard to get to simple sometimes. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.